Hi there, Mr. Mayo here. Today we're going to talk about tips for memorizing music. There's a lot of reasons for memorizing music. It could be that it's a requirement for some kind of audition, maybe it's for marching band, perhaps it's a segment of the music that you want to be able to practice anytime, anywhere, without the music because it's difficult or you want to focus on the artistry of it. No matter what the reasoning is, it's important to understand that we're all different. Memorizing music comes quickly for some, while it takes a great deal of time for others. It's nothing really to do with how good of a musician you are. It's more to do with how much working memory you have. Working memory is the short-term memory that is currently in use. Essentially, if we relate it to a computer, it's like the RAM of the human body. We have to work on a segment enough times so that it builds neural connections and becomes embedded in our long-term memory. That's like the hard drive of a computer or the storage on a phone or device. That's just kind of a rough breakdown of memory. Now let's actually get on to some tips. You have to be able to play your music well. A lot of times students try to memorize too early. You have to be able to play something with great accuracy numerous times in order to memorize it adequately. The more number of solid repetitions you have, the more likely it is to be stored in your memory. Break things down. A lot of times people think that they can memorize things by playing them top to bottom or a large chunk. You need to break things down into small bites. If you were at a restaurant ordering a steak, you wouldn't eat the whole thing in one bite. You would cut it up into smaller pieces, and the same's for music. The size of the chunk could depend on a lot of things. How difficult's the part? If it's challenging, you might want to focus on just a few measures at a time or just a measure at a time. If it's pretty easy, you actually probably can focus more on a phrase at a time. Some people even use a method that's known as chaining, where they play the first few notes over and over again, add a note, then repeat that, then add another note, and repeat that. So if I were to use numbers as an example, they would play 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and if that was correct, they would then play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If that was correct, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on until they have that particular measure or grouping of measures learned the way that they want to. Tempo. Break things down into chunks and work on them slowly. When you practice something slowly, it allows you to think more because it's at a speed that allows your mind to actually work. It allows you to internalize it. You can't rush the process. Just like you would break things down to work on tempo when practicing a piece, you need to do the same for memorizing. Be sure you use a metronome. Look at a little bit each day. Don't try to memorize the whole piece in one sitting. Focus on a few measures or perhaps one phrase. Work on it some, move on to something else entirely different, and then come back to it later on in the practice session. How did it stick? If it didn't, you may need to slow things down, break things down, and spend a bit more time on it. If it was successful, check it again later that day. If it didn't stick, you probably need to once again slow things down, break it down a little bit more, and spend more time on it. Sleep. I know a lot of people love it, but believe it or not, it could help you as a musician. Practice right before you go to bed or take a nap after you practice. When we sleep, our minds work on solidifying what we developed into our memory. Studies have actually shown that sleep can actually help musicians learn and memorize music. Analyze it. Are there patterns of what you're playing that you've previously learned in a piece? Are there scales being used? Arpeggios? Are there certain exercises you've previously played that you can relate to what you're memorizing? Are there music theory elements at play? Keeping all of this in mind as you're playing a passage can really help you to be actually able to play it from memory. It helps you relate it to what you already know. In addition, I've found that more experienced musicians tend to memorize music a lot faster. This might be because they've refined how they memorize music, but I also believe it has something to do with that they've spent more time playing things like scales, arpeggios, and exercises. Essentially, they built more neural connections which can be used towards their advantage. Because of our experience, it may influence how long it takes us to memorize music and the size of the chunks that we need to break things down in order to memorize the music. Use your senses. The senses are sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch. The ones that more often than not relate to music are sight, hearing, and touch. Sure, you might smell something, but that's probably not the music. And I sure as hope you're not tasting the music. That would be weird. Let's look at all the senses that we actually use. Sight. Visualize in your head the music that you're playing. It's known as photographic memory. So think about seeing the chunk on the page just as you normally were. A lot of times that can help you when you're first trying to memorize things to get that embedded into your mind. Hearing. Sing it. Get the music stuck in your head. This helps you audiate while playing. Also, when you just sing a small chunk, you can focus on just the rhythm. Then try to sing it while you're fingering, sliding, or air playing along. Touch. Use the patterns you recognize and built while you're working on the piece to your advantage. It's like we talked about a moment ago. You have to recognize patterns, relate it to your knowledge, and have the neural connections built well enough with the touch aspect for any type of memorization to work. Often in music, problems occur because we haven't built music up in relation to these senses. You have to use them towards your advantage. Another technique is the with and without music technique. Some people either do this by closing their eyes, rotating the stand, and some people even blindfold themselves. This works best if you're working in small chunks, such as a measure at a time, a few measures at a time, or if the music's pretty easy, maybe even a phrase at a time. So, practice a small segment of the music a few times with music and then once without the music. How did it go? Was there a spot where your memory lapsed? Work on it with the music a few times in that particular spot if it did. Then repeat the process. So play it a few times with music, then without music. If it goes well, play it less times with the music and without the music, just alternating it back and forth, until eventually you're not playing it with the sheet music at all. Then move on to the next segment. Do the same thing, few times with music, few times without. If you need to work on a spot, work on it. Then repeat the process until you don't need the music for that chunk. Then put those two chunks together. Play it a few times with music, once without the music. If you need to work on connecting, do it. It can be something that takes a great deal of time, but young musicians tend to be more successful with this method. Remember not to try to memorize too much at one time, otherwise it's not going to stick. Focus on maybe one phrase per practice session. Engage your mind just enough. It's a tricky concept. I've found that if you think about the harder aspects of the music when you come to them, you're going to have the tendency to be more accurate when you get there. And the same is true with memory. If you think about the segment you're coming to, you have a greater tendency to retrieve it from your memory. Mindset. You have to be positive about what you're doing. You can't just beat yourself up the entire time because it's not going as fast as you'd like it to when it comes to memorizing. You have to remember the word yet. I cannot do it yet, but I'm going to keep on working. If you don't think you can do it, you're not going to be able to do it. So believe in yourself. Above all, remember that memorization is a process that takes time. Be patient. You can do it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for future videos. Be safe, do work, and go practice.